that were here 2 years ago when Joyce and I did this presentation. If you remember, we were asking for input. We were in the process of putting this lethality assessment together, and we were asking for your input. And now what you have is the actual, after we've gotten everybody's input and we went back and made some changes, you actually now have our lethality, assessment guide. I was getting ready to say policy, but it's not. And so there's going to be some things that are the same from the presentation before, but just so you know, there are also some things that have changed. And for some of you that do not know Joyce Yedlosky, she has, and I said her name right, so, and I should, because I've been working with her for over 12 years. Joyce is one of the co-coordinators for the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and has been working in this field and with the coalition for 20 years. And we are very fortunate to have someone with her knowledge and her dedication to domestic violence in our state, and what we can do to protect victims and do some prevention in this matter. And so I'm going to turn this over to Joyce, and hopefully for some of you that's never seen this presentation, it'll open your eyes as to what domestic violence really is and what it's really like in a home. So,
thank you, Lisa. And we are going to go through a presentation, and hopefully by the end of this, you will be better equipped to handle those domestic violence cases that if you're doing GAL work, you will be encountering, if you haven't already. Also, as I'm going along, I know it's a big room, but if you have questions, please stop me along the way, and I'll try to be as interactive as possible, because I do want this to be applicable to give you what you need. And what we will be discussing is we are going to be looking at domestic violence in the context of lethality, or people who might eventually kill someone. And we do have an assessment guide that I'm going to go through the steps about how to assess for that. But you actually should be able to take home a little bit more than that, in addition to just assessing what the research tells us around whether or not someone will kill someone. I hope you will also have a better understanding of the nature and extent of domestic violence, and in particular, how to assess for that when you're a guardian on a case where there are children, and your job is to assess the impact that that domestic violence is having on those children. So those are some of the takeaways, hopefully, that you will get for today. So this is just a little slide. We have a grant that pays for this work, and I have to show this piece that says that they're not responsible for anything that I say, but they helped pay for it, being able to say it. So let me start by saying why we should assess for lethality in domestic violence cases. Generally, domestic violence isn't assessed consistently. Right now, if I were to ask you, had you not seen this presentation, you all would give me different answers as to how is it that you would know somebody might kill someone. And when I've been working in this field, I've been at the coalition for 20 years, we've been doing this work for about 35 years. And what I thought was important when I first started doing this work, I now know are not the most important things to think about, look for, or to ask about when it comes to asking the question of, is somebody going to die in this family? Prior to this, we had no formal way of communicating information back and forth across systems. And this, what I'm getting ready to show you, gives us a way of doing that. We make a lot of assumptions. Many of those assumptions are not true. Some might be. Some are actually assumptions that research tells us are true that we look for. Others are irrelevant, or at the very least not consistent. I think that the other piece is you are bringing information into a courtroom where a judge has to make a decision, and those decisions are only based on information that they have. So you want to make sure that you are asking the right information, you're bringing the right information so that the best decisions can be made. There's a lot of information that can be gathered in domestic violence cases, and I'm going to encourage you, particularly if you just have a little bit of time, and I know there's occasionally those cases where you only have a little bit of time, right? That you at least look for some of these indicators that I'm going to be talking about. It also puts individual incidents into a broader context. Often you may be in a case where you're looking at a particular incident, and if you will follow this assessment guide, it will encourage you to look beyond that incident, but to look more about what all has been happening over a period of time with that family. Most importantly, the research that we're getting ready to show you will help to save lives. That's the goal. It has been shown in other states that that's exactly what it does, and that's what we want to do here in West Virginia. When we look at intimate partners homicides nationally, unfortunately a lot of people are killed in domestic violence related deaths. And a couple important things for us to think about is that if you look at the statistic, only 4% of the homicides had victims ever availed themselves to domestic violence programs, and their reassault rate dropped by 60% when they went into a shelter or domestic violence programs. I say that because one of the things that you hopefully will be doing, even though you're providing great legal services in that family, is making sure that you get the victims to some type of service, because that in and of itself can also reduce lethality, and it can increase their well-being and increase the likelihood that there will be follow-through in the whatever legal proceeding that they are in. This is one of the most important pieces of research that was done. There's lots of research on lethality. What we focus a lot on is the work of Dr. Jackie Campbell from Johns Hopkins University, and this is a key piece of it, and it is that the escalation of domestic violence to a lethal level follows an identifiable pattern with identifiable indicators. So if we look at what the research says those indicators are, then it will help us to better identify those cases that might potentially be lethal. This statistic also says that we have opportunity to do that. That most of the people, in this case 83%, had availed themselves of some kind of system service. They interfaced with somebody, you, law enforcement, victim services, healthcare, someone. So if we all do this assessment, then there's opportunity to possibly make a difference. Yes?
I thought the earlier slide said 4%.
The 4% was specifically to domestic violence services. In other words, only 4% had availed themselves of domestic violence services, but they intersected with someone. So maybe the police were called, healthcare, somebody, or they got an attorney, or they filed a protective order. Just because they did those things doesn't mean they actually got to a domestic violence advocacy program. That's what the 4% was referencing. Good catch. The other piece of research says for every lethal incident, there are 9 near lethal incidents. So not only do people die from domestic violence, they almost die from domestic violence. And so with our assessment guide, the language we use around that is highly dangerous, potentially lethal behavior, because we want these predictors can help us not only with somebody who, keeping somebody from getting killed, but those incidents that somebody almost died, where there were some severe injuries or came pretty close to someone dying. So when we look at assessment tools, there's lots of them out there. You've probably heard about different ones. Some of them are, when you think about them, many times people think about a very long, drawn-out process, and that is not what I'm talking about today. There are safety assessments, and a lot of advocates do that to identify how to do safety planning with a victim, and they do that across all aspects of where they live, where they work, where they go to school, all of those things. There's also risk assessments, and the criminal justice system uses a lot of risk assessments. The LSCMI is one that you may be familiar with that has been used here in West Virginia. And that is a process, it's an evidence-based process on assessing whether or not somebody who's involved in the criminal justice system will commit another crime, that they will reoffend. So it's broader than domestic violence. It's talking about people who have committed a crime. What's the risk that they're going to reoffend. It is an evidence-based tool, but it is not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is lethality assessment specific for domestic violence offenders. There is some overlap in these types of risk assessments, but they're not exactly the same. So I want to focus in, first of all, on families experiencing domestic violence, and of those families, what are the chances that somebody might be lethal. So the model that we're looking at, it has been, all states are being challenged by the Office on Violence Against Women through their funding streams to develop some type of research-based program for assessing for lethality. That's because it's been shown to be effective. So each state, though, has liberty in how they go about doing it. So in West Virginia, we have convened a group where we brought people together, we brought in national experts, we looked at how other states did it, looked at how Maryland did it, how they're doing it in the New England states. Many of them are urban areas. And we adapted it to what do we need here in West Virginia based on the resources that we have or don't have here in West Virginia. And we came up with what we call DLAG, or a Dangerous Lethality Assessment Guide, that is modified for use here in West Virginia. We are, what this model will do is it takes, as I said, all domestic violence cases, looks for these research-based indicators, and then we find, do we have somebody who might be highly dangerous or potentially lethal? And if we do have somebody who's like that, then there's three things that we want to do. Number one, we want to increase the safety for the victim. Get that victim to someplace safe quick. We want to decrease the dangerousness of the offender. Many of the programs focused only on getting that victim to safety, which is very important. But there are things that we can do to decrease the dangerousness of the offender. Why are we putting the victim in a boat while the offender shark is still circling around, right? Let's do something with that offender. Then the third thing is, we all are doing this across all the disciplines, but sometimes we aren't talking to each other. So the third thing that we want to do is, how do we communicate what we know to other people who also need to know this information? We're doing this through a process. We're kind of in the middle of this process. We have some pilot teams that are looking at this and piloting this in individual counties, and we do have somebody who's evaluating it. Our hopes are that we will be able, if we all start using this, to reduce deaths in West Virginia. So we're, like I said, in about the middle of the process of evaluating this. As Lisa said, 2 years ago we were at the beginning where we were getting input. We got that input. Now we're bringing it to you. We're going to ask you to use it, and then we'll evaluate if it was effective. These are the 4 steps for the Dangerous Lethality Assessment Guide. The first one is you have to understand the nature and extent of the domestic violence. Then you have to look for the research-based indicators. If you find them, you increase the safety for the victim and decrease the dangerousness of the offender. And then you communicate, step 4, communicate that with other people who need to have that information in a way that honors confidentiality and all of your mandates that you have to deal with within your individual profession. The goal, we want to reduce fatalities in West Virginia. So this is the model. We have given some of you the DLAG book. Looks like this. I apologize that everybody doesn't have one. That was my error, and not everybody wants one, to be honest with you, and I'd rather you not throw it away because they're kind of expensive for us to print. So if you want one, take it. If you don't want one, leave it for somebody who does. And if you're that person who wanted one and can't find one that someone left, contact me and I will get you some. Yes?
Is it available online?
Yes, we can get it electronically as well. So you can email me and I'll be happy to send it to you online as well. Right now we're not putting it right up on our website because we believe it needs some training to go along with it. So if you want the electronic version, you can email me as well. My contact information is at the end of this presentation on the slides. So this is what the booklet looks like, and in the booklet it has a tab for each discipline. What is different about our model from other states is we're asking everybody to do it. Some places are just asking law enforcement to assess for this and then have them respond. We believe that victims of domestic violence are going to enter the system in a variety of ways, and that if everybody does this, we have a better chance of reducing lethality. But how everybody does it is going to be different. Everybody can do the same 4 steps, but it's going to look differently depending on who you are and what you do. So you have a page for an attorney and a GAL. There's a page for law enforcement. There's one for circuit court judges, family court judges, magistrates, advocates. Who am I missing here? Child protection services, prosecutors, batterer intervention programs. And so everybody will do the same thing, but it will look different. So what a family court judge does, they have different mandates than what you have or what a law enforcement officer has. So if you look at the GAL page, if you can turn to that, you can start to get a little bit of an idea of what we're asking a GAL to do. I'm going to go through more of the steps first, and then we'll focus in on what we're asking a GAL to do. But just to familiarize yourself with it if you have it in front of you. So let's go through the 4 steps. And the first step is understanding the nature and extent of domestic violence. And this is important because not all domestic violence is the same, and it's important for you to look beyond just the legal definition. So you do need to look at the legal definition, you're attorneys, I understand that, but we want you to, if you're really going to understand what's going on with the family, I need you to look beyond that at least for a little bit to understand the context of what's going on, and then you can make your legal arguments based upon the context that are happening. And so sometimes there is the snapshot version or a particular incident, but most of the time with domestic violence, it's a video or a pattern of behaviors that has happened over a period of time. That includes both illegal behaviors as well as things that are legal but still may be abusive or harmful to someone. So this is a better picture, if you will, or graphic around the differing contexts that domestic violence can happen. And so the first context is the context of coercive controlling abuse, and that type of abuse is a pattern where someone, through a variety of behaviors, ends up with all of the power and the control in the relationship. And we'll show you a video a little later about this kind of violence, but it involves physical violence, emotional violence, financial abuse, social isolation, using the children, which I think is really key in your GAL work, is how the children might get used in it. Using privilege that they may hold in the family or in the community. So there are a variety of things that they can do where they end up with the power and control, and it comes from a sense of entitlement where they believe that on some level they are able to do that, and the victim of this kind of violence feels trapped, a sense of entrapment. They feel like staying and leaving both has horribly negative consequences for them, and that they really don't have much choice in what happens in this home or in this relationship because of the coercive controlling violence. That is the typical domestic violence scenario that you probably have been trained on and that people are most familiar with. But that is not the only type of domestic violence out there. The second one is the violent resistance. And I like to say that this is the victim of that coercive controlling violence resisting back in some way. Have you ever had a case where both parties were using violence? Yeah? So often when someone pushes down, do people push back? Yeah, they do. It looks differently in each case. Some will fight back in self-defense. Some will fight back in maybe what's considered more of a retaliatory fashion, where after that person goes to sleep, they beat him with a baseball bat, right? The violent resistance is not necessarily legal. I'm not saying it's legal. Like self-defense, you can legally defend yourself. But if you beat somebody with a baseball bat and they weren't hurting you at the time, that's not exactly self-defense. My point is, the context of it is that it was produced and shaped by the coercive controlling violence. In other words, the person never would have beat him with a baseball bat had they not been beaten and controlled for years. I'm not justifying it, I'm saying that that's how it's produced and shaped. And there's research out there that shows that people who use this kind of violence do it in response to violence that has been used towards them. Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is because you have to understand what the context is, because you may be representing the person using that violence. You may be representing the child who has been exposed to that violence as well as the coercive controlling violence, and you need to make some kind of recommendations, or maybe you need to make recommendations for treatment based on the context of it. So that's why it's important to make that distinction, is for us to understand that there is coercive controlling violence, someone pushing down, and then someone's going to push back. And like I said, it looks different in each case, but we want to understand that there are those different contexts. Then there's this third kind of context that really isn't about coercive controlling violence. Sometimes it's referred to as situational. I'm calling it, lots of researchers call it non-controlling abuse, but it is sometimes what happens when people separate. Somebody comes in and catches their partner having an affair, and they pick up the closest object and throw it at him and hit him in the head. Technically, that's domestic violence. Wasn't an ongoing pattern, never happened before, and it was kind of situational based on what they were looking at the moment. Is it illegal to hit somebody in the head with an object? Yep. Again, I'm not talking about legalities, I'm talking about context. So what would that person who did that, what type of treatment would they need? What's the likelihood that they're going to do something like that again? That's what we want to look at when we're looking at those kinds of situations. Some also in this third category, this type of behavior may also be produced by injury or illness. So if somebody's had a head injury and prior to that they were never violent and now they're being violent, that could be that context. Or somebody who is like schizophrenic and not on their medication and they're delusional and they think a family member's hurting them and they do what they perceive as defending themselves and they hurt a family member. And again, you want to think about what would you give in terms of treatment for somebody who's using violence in that context. So when we're looking at the context, what we are really looking at is what is the intent of the violence when the person uses it. So when they picked up that ashtray and threw it, what was the intent? If they were fighting back in self-defense, what was the intent? If they were fighting someone that they believed was a member of the CIA and not their family member, what was the intent when they used that violence? What was the meaning of that violence to the victim? And what is the effect to the victim? Or another question, when you're trying to sort out what's going on, is who is doing what to whom and what is the impact? That's what you need to look for if you're looking at context. Not necessarily, you want to look at arrest reports, you want to look at paperwork, but that's going to help give you the answer to the question, who is doing what to whom and with what impact. That's what you're looking for when you're trying to understand context. Questions about context? Seeing some faces, I'm not sure what that means. Either you've just had this before, or you're not quite sure what I'm saying, or you're thinking of cases. I don't know. Now I'm getting some laughter. All right. No questions? So let's move in then to what the actual danger signs are. Like, what is it that research tells us that we need to look for? So we got domestic violence, one of those contexts I just talked about. Now let's look for what research tells us. Is somebody going to kill someone in this family? The first one is not surprising, possession and use of weapons. We hear a lot about weapons. That's why there are federal firearm prohibitions, because weapons in the hands of people who use domestic violence, unfortunately, are very deadly. Weapons are most dangerous if they have been used in the context of the domestic violence. So just because someone's using domestic violence and they hunt with weapons, that's not necessarily dangerous, but if they're pointing those weapons at that person, they're using them in the context, and probably the most dangerous is if they are prohibited and they still possess. This day and age, there are not any people who legitimately don't know that they are prohibited. So like some people will say, well, I didn't know it was prohibited. Pretty much every prohibition on firearms come with big warnings on protective orders. Law enforcement puts it on there. It's in code that has to be in a certain size print on the actual protective order. So there are clear opportunities for them to know that they're prohibited, and if they possess anyway, then that shows that not only are they wanting to potentially use that weapon to harm someone, but they're not following a court order that clearly stated that they were prohibited from having that weapon. The next one is direct threats to kill. Makes sense. A direct threat to kill is an indicator that somebody might kill someone. But I do want to emphasize that pay attention to this one, no matter what the how a person talks about it or how they say it, because sometimes trauma will impact how a victim reports threats to kill, and they may say something like, yeah, he says he was going to kill me all the time. We might expect to say, oh my God, he's going to kill me, but they may just have a flat demeanor and say, yeah, he said he's going to kill me. That's a direct threat to kill. Yeah. What exactly did he say? He said, if I leave, he's going to kill me. I will kill you. That's a direct threat to kill. Research shows that no matter what the emotion was when the person said that, if that was in there, we want to kind of mark that off as an indicator that they might actually kill the person. The threats to kill also are not just to kill their partner, but also themselves and or the children. So if they're directly threatening to kill anyone. And again, it's a direct threat, not something's going to happen here, or you're going to pay. Those are threats, and they're very serious threats, but the research shows that they are that threat of, I will kill you, I will kill myself, I will kill you and the children. Those are direct threats that score higher in terms of predicting lethality.
Just so you all know, we actually have a case in West Virginia where when these parties first married, the husband in the case said, if you ever leave me, I'll kill you. There was never any domestic violence, nothing in their marriage, but 5 years later, she's leaving, and they have 2 kids. And she goes to the magistrate, she asks for a protective order, and she says, 5 years ago he told me if I ever left him, he would kill me. There was nothing else, but again, that was 5 years ago, and she wasn't leaving. Now she was leaving. The protective order was denied, and quite frankly, I would have done the same exact thing, and anybody in here that was a family court judge in their prior life would have probably done the exact same thing. And he followed through. He shot her in the head while she was sitting at the school to pick up her 2 children. So, you know, that's an extreme, you know, kind of case, but that's how much they can actually mean that when they say it.
And that falls along, so you might think there's one indicator, a direct threat to kill, but I'm going to argue that there are actually 3 indicators in the example that Lisa just gave. And the second one is that the victim perceives that the offender might kill him or her. She went and got that protective order because she perceived he might kill her. So there's 2 right there. And that's very important. And I think that maybe was minimized in that particular case because people don't know, people don't understand this research. I would have minimized that as well. I would have said there's nothing else that has happened. And that's one of those assumptions that we make, that there has to be a certain number of things that has to follow on some kind of continuum before it gets to that place. No, it doesn't. And that's not the only example. That happens to be one you gave, but I can give you a whole bunch more that are like that, where they only had seemingly one incident. When you look back, you will find that there actually were more things, not necessarily physical violence though. Physical violence is one of those assumptions that we make. They have to be battered pretty badly before it gets to the point where someone's lethal. There are people who have died who have never been physically battered. They have some of these other signs, like direct threats to kill and threatening them with a weapon. Would be 2 examples of 2 pretty lethal behaviors where you're not physically bruised at all. The next indicator is strangulation, and there has been a lot of talk around strangulation in the past few years because we recently passed a code around that because this behavior is so lethal. Strangulation is a huge predictor of lethality. Victims often refer to it as choking, and that is, the research tells us that's okay to use that term when talking with a victim, to ask if they may say, I was choked, or has anybody choked you? Because that victims relate to that kind of question better than if you use the term strangulation. The legal term is strangulation, though. This is an ultimate form of power and control. When we think about that coercive controlling violence that I was talking about, laying hands on someone and stopping them from breathing at that close proximity is a ultimate form of power and control. Victims who have experienced that, it has made a huge difference. They came so close to death, they recognized how easy it was for that person to do that to them. Anything that that person needed, wanted, told them to do after that, they were like, I must obey, because this is what they can do to me if I don't. I mean, that is the ultimate form of power and control, just demonstrating that they can do that. This is the strangulation code that we have here in West Virginia that passed about 3 years ago, and it is being used. I see it being used a lot. I think that it has raised awareness that this happens a lot more than what we thought it did, and prior to this law passing, most of the time the charge was domestic battery, or it was went away when it was really high lethal behavior. So maybe we're saving some lives simply by having this new law out there to help deal with some of those cases. The next, yes?
It said without the person's consent. Is that actually a defense to say that the person consented to be strangled? I mean, because, you know, what if the victim's afraid to say,
You know, they consent, sometimes they consent in sexual acts, so that's the reason why that it's unless they consent. That's typically when it happens. And we're old school, so I'm sure that, you know, we've been consent to something like that, but it actually happens.
It also could be consent. A legislator brought this out. They used to wrestle, and you put somebody in a chokehold. That's a wrestle, you know, and you give consent for that. So they didn't want wrestlers and people with consensual sex acts to get arrested for strangulation. That's what they mean. A true victim of strangulation never consents. And this doesn't imply that they do. They just wanted to distinguish this from behaviors because of the two examples. I think those were two primary examples where people sometimes are okay with that. And that would not be considered strangulation.
Yes,
that's a really good question.
I have one quick question. Where does suffocation fall within strangulation? Because suffocation encompasses taking the person's airway into the pillow.
So if you look at this, and actually we've been challenged to update the code or to create a crime of suffocation, and that has, there are other states who are doing that. When you look at our definition here, it says, knowingly, willfully restricting another person's air intake or blood flow by the application of pressure on the neck or throat. So if you put a pillow over their head, you're not pushing their throat, so you're suffocating them, it doesn't apply. But if you do anything else to suffocate them, it would apply. So we've been challenged that this would not cover suffocation. Good question.
Or if they hold your head underwater while you're in the bathtub, you know, I mean, that happens too. And so,
do y'all have a lot of suffocation cases out there? We're actually looking at that to see how often that those folks are slipping through the cracks. So.
I bet you that we have a lot more of it than what we realize, because how quickly somebody can put a pillow over your face when you're in an argument, and right. So
and let me say something about strangulation, suffocation, and research indicators. So right now we're talking about indicators that someone might kill someone, and strangulation is the indicator, not suffocation. I'm not saying that suffocation isn't an indicator. I'm saying that it didn't come up in the research. But this distinction between suffocation and strangulation is a nuance around this concept. So I think we would want to maybe look into it to see it. And what I'm trying to say is suffocating someone with a pillow just as strong of a predictor as strangling them by putting your hands on their neck? And I don't know the answer to that. The research doesn't make that distinction. Okay?
I think they will eventually, because I do believe that if you look at some of the literature on this particular issue, it is a sexual power and control issue. Stuffing the pillow over the face is not, but the actual hand and the choking is a power and control thing.
Yeah.
So it's a domination issue.
Yeah, so it is an ultimate form of power and control, and I'm not sure that suffocation has that same power. I'm think it is pretty close, but it's not cited in this particular research. So we'll keep an eye on that. And I think if it comes close to predicting, if it looks very similar to a strangulation, then I would kind of check it off and err on the side of safety.
Well, and as you know, guardians, and you're looking at domestic violence in the home and stuff, I would say if someone has told you that they've had a pillow put over their head and to the point where they're struggling to breathe, that's a huge indicator of lethality. I mean, I can't imagine, you know, not being able to breathe, and you are in a struggle.
And probably you're going to have some of these other indicators as well.
There's got to be other things going on in that house besides putting a pillow over somebody's face.
So the next indicator is stalking behavior. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just have another input about the smothering ground. This seems to be addressed between intimate partners, but if you're looking at lethality for children, if you've got somebody that's willing to find smothers after underwater in the bathtub, I would want the statute to address that, regardless of whether it's a lethality factor in this house.
Okay, so for those of you who couldn't hear, she was saying that's particularly, tell me if I'm summarizing this, sorry, but particularly for children, if you're holding someone's head under the bathtub like a child, that you would want that to be addressed in the same way that strangulation is being addressed, in that it's a felony level crime, and that you would want the statute to reflect that. So there are lots of folks who are, like many of the states who got strangulation statutes are now following up with suffocation statutes. And West Virginia, we have been at the coalition approached to do that as well. We do not have language that will appear in the form of a bill this session, although I wouldn't be surprised if somebody didn't bring it up because it has been an issue.
Let me just say this as a guardian for children. If you've got a child that's expressing to you that a parent, a step-parent, a live-in, you know, relationship with one of the parents is holding their head underwater or holding a pillow over their face, you know, we've got a huge issue, you know, and you need to look at that seriously. You know, there are instances.
I would take that as an indicator regardless of research.
Right. And there are instances where they may have running water and holding their, you know, it's called waterboarding, but they do that to the kids as well, you know, and so it's a near drowning experience. And that, you know, that's, you really, you know, I mean, that should just bring the, you know, the hair up on the back of your neck.
And I'm going to talk in a little bit about how these behaviors relate to the children who are exposed to these behaviors. I just want to clarify that these behaviors that I'm describing, what the research is showing us is that these are indicators for intimate partner violence, adult against adult, and not for adult against child. I'm not saying that they wouldn't also be there for children, but we're talking about when one adult does this to another adult in the context of domestic violence. That's what these specific indicators are for. I'll talk in a moment about then how that could predict risk of harm to children. So the next one is stalking, and so stalking is another one of those highly lethal behaviors, and it is following someone, following them electronically, not just actually physically following them, or somehow knowing where they are all of the time and creating some kind of pattern of behavior where a reasonable person would feel fear. You may see a change in the stalking code this session that better equips us to deal with the way people stalk people these days using electronic means and fitting better with a course of conduct as opposed to simply following someone. Because you can have a course of conduct that is describes what is stalking behavior that's beyond just following. So this is also an indicator. Some victims will say he or she is stalking me. Others will simply just describe a series of behaviors where their partner knows what they're doing at all times, where they are, who they're with, and they may even engage people who unknowingly are helping them to stalk. So they may say, tell their buddies, hey, my wife is having an affair, I need you to go and watch what she's doing, and then they report back to their wife everything that they did, and that they somehow knew that, and the buddy just thought he was helping out because he'd been cheated on too and didn't really like that kind of behavior. So they will use people in that way to help them to stalk, so that they themselves don't always do the following. Very serious crime. whole training in and of itself. But it is also an indicator that someone might kill someone. Actually, there's some research around protective orders and the effectiveness of protective orders. It's called the Kentucky Protective Order Study, if you're interested in looking at it. And it shows that generally protective orders are effective in decreasing violence, but with stalking behaviors, they are only barely statistically significant in their effectiveness. In other words, they're less effective on people who stalk, as are some of the other remedies that we have to reduce dangerousness of offenders. Intrusive coercive control is our next indicator. So somebody can control someone in a variety of ways. Intrusive coercive control means that every aspect of that person's life is basically controlled by their partner. What they wear, what they eat, where they go, who they talk to, who talks to them, what undergarments they wear. I mean, I'm talking really personal control of that person's behavior. That is an indicator of lethality. And you may hear victims talking about that. You may see that in victims, and they can't even answer your question if their partner's around, because they don't even know how to speak without that partner somehow giving them a nonverbal or a verbal cue that it's okay to answer that question. That's intrusive coercive control. Forced sex is another indicator. There are many ways to sexually assault and sexually abuse someone. When rape occurs in a forced manner, it is also an indicator of lethality. I think maybe that's one that people don't realize is an actual indicator of lethality. So far, everything that I have talked about are characteristics of a domestic violence offender. They are behaviors of offenders. When this research came out, they looked at victim behavior and offender behavior. They couldn't find any consistent behaviors of what the victim did, with the exception of this one that I'm getting ready to talk about. All of the consistencies and the predictable patterns were about offenders, because the offenders are the ones that kill people. What victims do in reaction is a variety of things, and it doesn't really matter what victims do unless they leave. The one thing that we think victims should do, particularly when children are involved, you need to leave to protect those children. That's the one thing they can do to increase their own lethality. And there's also research that shows that not only is it more lethal for them when they leave, but the increase of other form of violence skyrockets as well. So they're more likely to get beaten, they're more likely to have their money taken from them, they're more likely to have legal actions put against them. All of those behaviors to coerce them and control them are utilized when they leave. And that's the third indicator in Lisa's example that she gave earlier, is that she was leaving. So he said he was going to kill her, she thought he was going to kill her, and she was leaving. 3 indicators, and they proved to be predictors in that particular case. Most of this predictor has to do with the perpetrator believes that they are truly, really leaving. Sometimes people will threaten to leave a lot. They may go to their parents' house for the night. Some things that indicate that they're truly leaving is they get an attorney and go to family court. They file a protective order. They do the things that you're probably involved with them in the process of leaving. So you're going to be on the front lines for this one in particular. If they're in the context of leaving and you're involved, then that means that they're doing something pretty solid to make that leaving become a potential indicator for lethality. The next one is a little bit different. The offender is unemployed. Now, this doesn't mean that all unemployed people might kill their partners. Remember this, these are characteristics of domestic violence offenders. So if they are a domestic violence offender and they're unemployed, this scored pretty high on research, almost as high up there as guns, believe it or not. I was really surprised when I heard about that one. This is something that you need to be asking about, people will ask about it generally to think about, can they pay my fees, or can they pay for child support, or those kinds of things. You also need to be asking about it because it's a potential indicator for lethality. The other indicator that isn't exactly offender behavior, but it's kind of about offender behaviors, is if the victim has a child that's not the offender's biological child. And this is one of those indicators that also shows when that scenario occurs with children, there's a higher likelihood of child abuse as well. So when the offender the victim has a child that's not the offender's, there's a higher likelihood for lethality, and there might also be a high likelihood of child abuse in that case as well. The next one is that the violence is escalating, and usually we look at, is it escalating over the past year? And when I say escalating, that means that the violence is happening more frequently and or more severely and or more psychologically damaging. Victims may say things like, yeah, there's been control and stuff over the years, but I've never seen him like this. Or I don't know what to do now. I'm really frightened. I wasn't as scared before, and now I really am. Or you may ask them what types of things happened, and it has gone from a push and a shove to strangulation and pulling weapons. So that would be examples of escalation. Substance abuse is not an indicator. I'm only putting it on here because it frequently co-occurs with domestic violence, and it makes potentially lethal situations more lethal. It makes it worse. But if you were to look at all the people using substances and committing domestic violence, that in and of itself isn't an indicator. But if there are indicators there, like you're threatening to kill someone, you're using a weapon, you're strangling them, and then either the victim or the offender is using substances, then that can exacerbate the situation. Those are the indicators. Additional things to consider is that if you don't have the indicators, it doesn't mean all is well. Maybe you just don't know all of the indicators. Maybe we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Many times, the victims don't want to let us all know what all is going on. They're afraid of what might happen to them if they do. And offenders most of the time are not going to tell us these things, or they're going to have a different version of what is happening. Sometimes the children will tell us these things, but they may also fear for their safety or the safety of their parents, so we may not know all of these things. Understanding these indicators is an ongoing process. That's why we ask everybody to do it. So we're asking law enforcement, they come on the scene. They actually have, you'll see in the back of this guide, they have an interview guide, and the rules for law enforcement procedure in domestic violence were changed last year, and they are required to interview victims of domestic violence to look for these indicators. And that form that you see back there was borrowed from the Maryland Lethality Assessment Program, which was one of the first nationally recognized lethality assessment programs. And so the questions that the officers ask are exactly those questions, because they are research-based to show the most effect in being able to get quality answers that are predictors of lethality. So you will start to see those questions being asked, and they will be attached to police reports. So you will see what they are getting when they talk with victims on scene. But what is happening then may be different from what's happening 5 days later or 2 months later. That's why we're saying it's a progression. It might not have been lethal then, but now that the victim has left, things have escalated, so things are more lethal now. So we are asking each person to do this assessment at each point in time that you interact with them, so that we can see how things are progressing. Everybody has to gather information, and the more sources of information, the better. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to gather information and how you can then use it. So if you have your assessment guide, then you can look at the way that we talk about guardians gathering information. So there are many ways that you can get this information. Because guardians are in a position to have to assess what the impact of this domestic violence has on children, there's a national project that will help you with the exact kind of questions on how to do that if you want that help. And it can be found at this site. It's a group called the Battered Women's Justice Project, and they have received funding from the Office on Violence Against Women, and they have developed an actual interview guide for guardians in family court proceedings. And it is a fairly extensive interview guide, but what it does is it not only has some guide for questions, but then it tells you what to look for in the answers and how those answers relate back to parenting, how they relate back to impact on children, how they relate back to not only negative factors, but potential strengths in parents. And it allows you to be able to rate on a scale what a particular parent, how a particular parent is behaving. Not all domestic violence offenders are going to score high on lethality, and they're horrible parents in every aspect. So it gives you ways of assessing the differing aspects that you would be required to assess in your guardian role. It also has on there the lethality indicators, so you can look for those as well. I encourage you to really look at that guide. We have taken that guide here in West Virginia and we're adapting it in some pilot counties for use with child welfare, because child welfare is also in a position where they have to assess the impact of domestic violence on children. So we're making a child welfare version of it. But you can use the guide to help you with your assessments. If you're not into the guide, you're not into long forms like that, and you want to do your own thing, or you don't have time, realistically, if you can ask a few questions, please ask about those indicators. If you're talking with a victim, at least ask for those indicators. You would be surprised how many situations, if you just let the person talk, they are not going to necessarily bring up those indicators. I had a person come into our office. We don't do direct service, but occasionally we get people walking in. She came in and she said, I want to separate from my husband. He's controlling. I just let her talk. I asked her a few questions. She kind of acted like she was afraid of him, but she didn't talk about physical violence. She did talk about control. She talked about a little bit of financial abuse. My thought was I'll refer her to the domestic violence program the next day because it's 6 o'clock in the evening. But I had just heard about this program. I thought, let me go ahead and let me just try this. And I asked her the question. She had almost every indicator of lethality, which I should have thought about, because why is she walking into my office, which isn't even her local office, at 6 o'clock in the evening, and why is she wanting this help in kind of an emergent way? But he had done all of those things, and she hadn't told me in just her story, and I let her talk as long as she wanted to. When I asked the specific questions, the answers were there. So I highly encourage you to ask about these indicators. And that's one of the best ways to gather the information. But if you look at the DLAG, it also says that you can gather it through court records, through law enforcement reports, especially now that we will have the interview guide on those reports. Look at past DBPOs and past records. Look for 5 years ago, if she'd have filed something 5 years ago and said he was going to kill her. Look for those things. Did you want to add to it?
Well, I wanted you to tell them the percentage of abuse and neglect cases where there's domestic violence also within that case.
You mean
With child abuse and neglect. CPS, when they go in and they're looking the high level of cases in which there's also domestic violence in that home.
So a couple statistics with child abuse and neglect is that domestic violence is the single precursor to child abuse and neglect fatalities. So if you're looking for what's the best predictor of child abuse and neglect fatalities, look for domestic violence, because that is a huge predictor for fatalities in general. It's a national statistic. And between 40 to 60% nationally of cases where child welfare is involved also involves domestic violence. And we're kind of gathering that information here in West Virginia as well. And it is running close to 40% to 60% in West Virginia as well. Is that what you're looking for, Lisa? Yeah. Yes.
I'm just starting to think as you're going through this. So if we're appointed in family court custody issue, and it's because there's all these tensions and things that the judge feels that the child needs an attorney, would you suggest it's probably a good idea to kind of look for the legality indicators when you're interviewing the parents or a kid, or just...
Yes, look for the lethality indicators any place that you can. We're training family court judges to know what these lethality indicators mean.
So even if we're
Yes.
brought in just because of custody?
Yes, even if you're brought in from custody dispute, let me say too that 76% of contested custody cases usually involve domestic violence. So there's a likelihood that what you think you have is just a contested custody case, and then when you start finding out, you realize there's domestic violence happening there. If you've gotten to that point and you see that there's domestic violence, look for these indicators. Look for them in past reports, talk to the children, talk to the victim, and ask specifically about these indicators. And then if they are there, I highly encourage you to report them to the judge, because how can a judge make a good decision if they don't know if those indicators are there? Yeah.
And also, the only other thing I was going to say is that typically the perpetrator of domestic violence is the one who makes the most false claims in a custody dispute. So when when we put into the law about when you make a false accusation about a parent, you know, that's a crime and it can be reported to the prosecutor. The majority of the false allegations that were being made by the perpetrator of domestic violence.
Yes.
Without an expert, how are we able to get this in front of a judge who may not know about it, and also when there's attorneys representing parties? I mean, how are we able to?
Excellent question. So the question, if you didn't hear, without an expert, how are we able to get this in front of a judge? I highly encourage you to use an expert to talk about what the indicators are for domestic violence. That was.
Well, I mean, are we able to do that under with fee waivers? Because, I mean, just, or even in the situations where a working poor person is expected to pay our fees, they can't afford us, let alone to pay an expert.
So there are different levels of experts. So if you want to hire an expert to do an assessment, somebody who can do a psychological assessment, those kinds of things, those are your more expensive experts, and they're going to look at this case, they're going to assess this case. What you could use that's a lot cheaper and many times just as effective is many of the domestic violence advocates have been qualified as experts. I don't have a PhD. I've been qualified as an expert. I can come and talk with a judge in the way that I'm talking to you about. These are what the indicators are. I don't know Jane Doe that you're representing. Here's what the indicators are. And then you can say in Jane Doe's case, here's the indicators.
And the judges are deemed, and we continue to train them on this. And so if you put in your guardian report, there has been strangulation, there has been this, there has been that, they're going to immediately know that there's lethality indicators within this case. They're going to know it because they're being trained and we're getting them hard on these indicators.
I'm going to get the video for this end. You're all right with that? So we're going to show this video, but I'm going to wait till the end to show it. I want to make sure that I equip you really well and that you have some questions with, okay, now you've got these indicators, what is it that you can do? And I think that's where you were leading us. How do we get this before a judge, or what kinds of things can we do? And again, what you're thinking about is, if you're aware of these indicators, is this victim safe? That's the first thought. Where is this victim staying? And that, depending on where you are in the case, you could be very early on and this victim may not be in a safe place. I highly encourage you to connect them with a licensed domestic violence program. That statistic at the beginning where I said only 4% of people had availed themselves of domestic violence programs, get them to a domestic violence program. That will help them. They can help them to safety plan. They have 24/7 crisis lines. You're not available 24/7, and do you know how to safety plan with them? So get them to that program that can help them with all the ins and outs of things that are going to happen in between your hearings and the things that you're doing with them. So get them to a safe place. And what we tell law enforcement, and I'm telling you this too, if you're talking with them and they're not in a safe place right now, help them make that call right then. They need to be the one to call. We don't force them to do something, but let them use your phone, or if you're in a safe place for them to do it. We tell law enforcement, if it's safe, call from on the scene so they can connect with an advocate right away. Because when we intervene and the victim is taking actions to leave, and remember that is lethal. Offenders respond immediately. They don't wait till the next hearing to respond. They respond immediately. So we've got to get them to safety immediately. And then the second piece of it is, what can we do to reduce the dangerousness of the offender? And we'll talk about what is it that you can do along those lines. Here's where I want to talk about substantial risk of harm to children. Again, these indicators, while there may be some overlap, and we've mentioned a few, but these are also indicators that an offender might kill a child. I want to talk about how this type of behavior affects children. You have a parent who might kill the other parent. Is that pretty traumatic to the child? Is that substantial risk of harm to the child? Yeah. And sometimes those cases do involve actually killing the children. And they're looking at more research to see if these are if these predictors in any way also predict child deaths. And they're not saying that yet. There are a couple research pieces that say that, but at the very least what they say is they do create substantial risk of harm to children. And so what we encourage, one of the things that we encourage people to do is if you are a mandated reporter, that this would probably rise to the level of a mandated report if the children are in a home where this type of behavior has occurred, even if no hands have been laid on the children. That the fact that somebody might kill the children's parent is pretty substantial risk of harm to the children. Did you want to say something else, Lisa?
Well, what I was getting ready to say is exactly what this next slide is, and you know, children are witnessing the murders. They're, in most cases, finding the body. They come home from school, they find their mother, dad, or they find both parents. Domestic violence, it's like terrorist attacks, okay? You don't always know when it's going to happen, but you're always on edge when you live in these countries where we have terrorist attacks on a regular basis. You're always on edge, wondering when it's going to happen again. We talk about people walking on eggshells. Kids do too. And even if they're not the subject of the abuse, they're walking on eggshells because the abuse is happening in their home. And if you think for a second that they don't hear it, they don't know what's going on, and just because they haven't been the actual victim, that it's not like PTSD. I mean, kids are being diagnosed with that who are witnessing domestic violence in homes. And so this is very detrimental to children, very detrimental.
The #1 cause to PTSD in children under 4. Did you know children under 4 could have PTSD? They can, and the #1 form is abuse to their parent, their protective parent. Also, I want to say, if you look at the bottom statistic here, only 8% of the cases where somebody actually died, was CPS involved? Was it reported? And I want to emphasize this because we're talking to folks working in family court, because family court, I understand that the issues of family court versus circuit court and making referrals around CPS and those kinds of things, but I want to emphasize that probably the cases that are in that the 92% that didn't go to CPS were the cases where, because nobody really was laying hands on the children, or it wasn't direct, what we call direct child abuse. And I would like to argue that this is direct child abuse of this level. Not all forms of domestic violence is necessarily to that level, I'm just going to say, but when you have somebody who might kill someone, I really highly encourage you to make that referral. I'm seeing some no's. People are saying, go ahead.
Pick up the phone and CPS is going to screen it out.
Exactly.
If your report is that I'm the guardian ad litem, I've concluded there's domestic violence in this home, I'm making a mandatory report, it's going to get screened out and nothing is ever going to
Well, let me just say this, and the reason why they're screening it out is that you said there's domestic violence in this home. You have to then go further, and it's affecting the children in this manner. And
It's going to get screened out.
And you have to show what all the lethality issues are in there. Now, if it gets screened out, you as a guardian, you can then present this to your judge, and the judge can order CPS to investigate. Family court can order them to investigate.
And I that's what I was meaning when I said, I get it when we talk about making these referrals, but we are training CPS on this. This is still fairly new for a lot of people. And I do encourage you, if these indicators are here, you have to specifically cite the indicators. You have to say, on June 1st of whatever date, there was a strangulation occurred, it's in the police report, or the victim reports, and cite these actual indicators in your report to CPS. And I know, but also you can say that you did it, and to not do it, and then maybe they wouldn't have screened it out that one time out of the 99, okay? So I encourage you to still do it and to specifically report the indicators, not just report that there's domestic violence, but specifically if there are these indicators. That's not all domestic violence cases, but where they are, please list them. And because they can also, if a report is made, I'm going to talk a little bit later here, some of these indicators are actually aggravated circumstances that can be used in a child protection case to proceed towards termination, those kinds of things. So let's look at your page if you have one that you can see, and let's talk about some other things that you can do. One of the things that Jackie Campbell talked about in working with the victims is it important to discuss with the victims your concern for their safety. And I don't know why people are hesitant to do this. I guess because it sounds so horrible. With all victims, we want to say we're concerned for your safety. If somebody's going to die, are you concerned for their safety? Or are you concerned they're going to die? Concerned they're going to die, right? That's a higher level. We are asking, if these indicators are here, make a heightened response, and that includes your conversation. I'm concerned you're going to die. You have told me that he has strangled you. He pulled a weapon on you. You think he's going to kill you. You're leaving. Report back. I'm afraid you're going to die. Let's talk about what you can do now to stay safe. A lot of people who are hesitant to use that language, but Dr. Campbell says that that's the language we need to be using. It has an actual effect in saving lives. Remember, that's the goal. We want to save lives. So use that language and talk with them, and then explain what they can do to stay safe. Connect them with that domestic violence. What is your safety plan? And if you don't know what to tell them about your local domestic violence program, you need to be having a conversation with your local domestic violence program so that you know what to tell them when they say, okay, I want you to help me stay safe. What are you going to do next? Make sure you know what that conversation is and how you can connect them with that program. You can contact me if you're not sure who your program is or if you want more information on that. Also, making sure you explain the court process, and I know you do that, but this is somebody who is afraid they're going to get killed on the courthouse steps. Like, they might need it mapped out in every way possible, and they may not want to do what you suggest, not because it's not good legal advice, but because they're afraid for what's going to happen to them. Discuss the impact that this has on their children if you have the opportunity to. And in guardians, I think you'll have more of an opportunity to do that maybe than some of the other things I'm suggesting. They may not recognize the impact it has on their children as well. And I want to just sit there for just a second. There are many judges and professionals who have said, well, if the children aren't themselves abused, then it's not really having an impact on them. So if professionals think that way, then parents are going to think that way too. They may think that, well, they don't really know what's going on, or they're too young, or this really isn't impacting them in the same way, or they may be very caught up in the survival of themselves and the trauma that they are experiencing that they're not able to see that. So being able to talk with them about that. Also, you may need to, in whatever way you're representing them, go back to that context piece. And if you are seeing somebody who's a potentially protective parent who used violence because they were protecting themselves or their children, or they were resisting violence being used against them, you might need to explain that. And the law enforcement terminology for that, and prosecutors use, is the term predominant aggressor. So when both people are using violence, they actually have in their rules for procedure how to determine who is the predominant aggressor. And so as a guardian, you may need to do that to some extent as well. And the rules around that are in Title 149, Series 3, the Law Enforcement Response to Domestic Violence, and it gives you the elements of what law enforcement and prosecutors use to determine a predominant aggressor in domestic violence. It's kind of like the legal version of distinguishing the two contexts that I presented you in the beginning. It may be important to argue or to talk about not giving up the protections that are already in the case. And this attorney page is not just for guardians, it's also for you maybe just representing the parent. Sometimes there are domestic violence protective orders in place, and as you move through the process and move towards divorce or other kinds of proceedings, people will kind of agree away the protective order. We don't need that anymore, things have calmed down, let's just get rid of that and move on to something else. I highly discourage you to do that if there are lethality indicators. Because those protective orders might still need to be there to continue to protect that person. And I want to just also say that there are civil protective orders, and there are also conditions on bond. And so when criminal charges are filed, there are conditions put on bond that that person stays away from the victim of that. Is a condition of the bond the same as a domestic violence protective order?
I don't think so.
No, and your biggest problem with your conditions for bond, the only person that knows what their condition for bond is the defendant. There is nothing on any registry anywhere that has the bond conditions to stay away from the victim or the children. Only the domestic violence protective order that is on our domestic violence database and with the National Registry provides law enforcement with the conditions of the protective order. And that's for all law enforcement everywhere. So maybe the arresting officer knows what the bond conditions are, but that doesn't mean that the officers if you're in Kanawha County, that the officers in Putnam County know what the bond conditions are. And so it's absolutely not the same.
There are several provisions that are different, and I think for the victim, there are other things that a domestic violence protective order does other than keep the offender away. Who's going to live in the house? How are the kids going to have visitation? Are they going to have visitation? Who's going to pay the electric bill? Is there going to be any child support? Bond conditions don't do any of those things, and those are things that need to happen when parties separate. So there are people who have said, and we have victims coming to us and say, well, I was told I don't need to get a protective order because there's conditions on my bond. Please do not ever say that. If you hear somebody saying that, let them know there are very distinct, different protections that are available in a civil domestic violence protective order versus conditions of a criminal bond. Many of the victims don't know the difference. They will call conditions of a bond a protective order because that's the more common term when it's really something different. So part of your job too may be to help them understand the differences. Let me also say one more thing about victim safety is that there is something called an address confidentiality program. There are some people who are so afraid that they need to hide from their offender, and these people who are in lethal situations would be the ones that would need to be hiding from their offenders. And so in West Virginia, the Secretary of State becomes their address. So their official address is a post office box. It's on their driver's license, their voter's registration, and nobody knows where they really live. And the state has to accept that post office box as their official address. And then the mail gets sent to them via the Secretary of State's office, who knows what their actual physical address is. I caution folks in child protection and in law enforcement that state agencies are not allowed to reveal that address. So if somebody's a part of that program, first of all, they'll have a card from the Secretary of State that says that they're a part of that program. And then we have to be careful as records flow back and forth, particularly in child protection and law enforcement, that has the actual physical address on there, because law enforcement and CPS has to know where the physical address is because they have to check on everybody. But they have to be careful not to put that on public reports that the offender would then get a hold of, and now they've breached their confidentiality as to where their physical address is. So just know that that's out there to protect victims as well. And so some of what you may do is advise victims of that. And anybody can get into that program through a licensed domestic violence program. They can apply through the licensed domestic violence program.
Also, if we're dealing with children and issues of visitation and things of that nature, specifically, the judge has to make a ruling that by giving out the victim's address, that they are not jeopardizing the safety of that victim. The judge has to make that ruling. And so in those cases, when you're dealing with these lethality indicators and you're the guardian for the child, be aware that if the child is living with the victim, whether the judge is making those specific findings, and whether you think that it could jeopardize the safety of the child and the victim if the victim's address is provided to the respondent or the other parent.
So a couple of things for victim safety is to, it's discouraged to use mediation. Somebody's not going to mediate well with somebody who they are afraid is going to kill them. So it's not recommended. If you're in a position to appeal unfavorable orders that make someone unsafe, please do so, particularly like those protective orders. And again, this is for attorneys who are acting as an attorney for perhaps a victim as well as a GAL. Anybody want to add anything to help keep, what is a heightened response for keeping a victim safe who might possibly die from other offenders' lethal behavior?
What about calling the police and asking them to take her to the abuse shelter?
Excellent. Calling the police and asking them to take her to the abuse shelter. Let me just say something about that. That's a way of immediately getting someone to a shelter. And Title 149, Series 3, Law Enforcement Rules and Procedure for Domestic Violence, that I've mentioned several times, says that they have to do that. And they also have to take them to court hearings if that's what they need to do. So police can be used as transportation. Now, are they always available to do that? In our rural counties, that's really difficult. It may be 2 o'clock in the morning and there are literally 2 officers for the whole county. And so if they've got something else that's happening that takes up their time, then that could be a hardship for them. But they are required to do that and to get that person to safety as soon as possible. Yeah.
You said there's no real correlation between what the victim does and the response by the perpetrator. What about what the victim's advocate does? I mean, I'm thinking about calling CPS and saying there's domestic violence and here are the lethality indicators and you need to get involved. Is there a correlation between increases in protective activity like that and threats to the victim?
So it's a long question. It says, is there research on what an advocate does, or probably what anybody does, to help protect the victim on increasing their lethality? So the research didn't specify that. I think, though, that it's sort of an answer yes, because all of those things are done in response to the victim leaving. So what the research said is when the victim does things that shows that they're actively seeking to leave, such as calling CPS, going to an advocate, going to a shelter, filing a DVPO, all of those things that does as part of what increases the lethality, but they couch it in that it's victim behavior because they're the one choosing to leave. Now there was some other research that shows things that maybe make it more dangerous for a victim. It didn't hit the lethality, but it said when professionals respond in a way that isn't safe, that it can increase the lethality. So they call the police and the police is like, ain't nothing going on here. I'm not even gonna make a report.
So,
okay? That could increase, or they call CPS and nobody responds. And that could make it worse.
Or they file for a protective order and the family court judge says, there were no recent threats,
yes,
or you haven't reported it in the past, and therefore it didn't happen.
Yes. So there's research that shows that makes it more dangerous. It didn't hit the lethality research. I'm a fan of that, though, because I agree. If we don't respond appropriately, we're making it more dangerous for victims. I mean, it's almost common sense. If they go to get protection and they're not protected, then now what are they supposed to do? So I think that's a really relevant question.
And that also emboldens the offender.
Yes, it says, see, I told you nobody's going to do anything, and what I'm doing really isn't wrong. If it was really wrong, then CPS would have paid attention. They would have given you the protective order. So yeah, I think that's very important. Okay. Okay, do you want to say what this do to offenders, and we'll go to the video. So a couple things about the offender. I want to say something about CPS proceedings, if we can ever get the person in there, is when we look at aggravated circumstances, rape is considered of the other child's parent, not just rape of the child, but the child's parent. And then felonious assault. When we look at felonious assault, strangulation is a felonious assault. Attempting to kill someone, threatening to kill someone. So some of these things are considered aggravated circumstances. And that's why I'm suggesting if they're aggravated circumstances, they at least rise to the level of a report. And then compliance hearings, Rule 24A, and making sure that there's cross-examined in the GAL report where we are specifically asking about these indicators. And again, these indicators are there, take them seriously. What people tend to do is say, I know Joe. Joe wouldn't do that. Yeah, Joe would do that. We know lots of people. There are people, that's why you hear the neighbors that, I didn't think Joe would do that. Joe seemed like a nice guy when they're interviewing him after the homicide, suicide event, right? So that's not an indicator of how you know someone or how they act. Pay attention to the actual indicators.
Also, you have to keep in mind, these individuals are charming. both men and women who commit domestic battery, they are charming. And sometimes they come across way better in court or when they're being interviewed than the actual victim does. And so you have to keep that in mind. And we're going to show you something real quick. It's 9 minutes. This is a horrible video, and it's going to bother some of you in here. But I want you to realize one thing. You may think that this is the extreme. What's unusual about this video is that we actually have it in the first place. You don't normally get to see this kind of domestic violence, and it's real. So you're going to get to see what's going on. And in most instances in domestic violence, the badgering, the criticism, the kind of things that you're going to see in here, this is going on in the home, and it's going on in front of the kids.
And I want you to look for how many indicators you'll see in this video.
So the only unique thing about this is that this perpetrator videoed everything that he was doing to the victim, and we all have it. Otherwise, it would be a he said, she said, but we actually have video.
And actually, he didn't video it, he directed his 13-year-old son to video, which shows the nexus. You'll see kids in it, and the videographer is the child.
York, in a nice house like the ones you know. Behind closed doors, a father commands his 13-year-old son to pick up a camera and start recording.
Look at me, bitch. You play those stupid games with me, I'll knock your teeth out of your face.
The father delivers a verbal flogging to the mother in front of their children.
You act like in front of the kids.
It will go on for nearly an hour.
You little slut. If I see a dog trim your ass up, I won't stop. I won't stop.
It is domestic abuse, the kind we hear about but often don't believe.
I don't see a stupid ass group of you stupid ass helper.
Susan is 42 years old. They have 3 children. The father, Ulmer, directs his 13-year-old son, the cameraman, to get a close-up of their emotionally battered mother.
Junior, do you see the tear? Nah. Knock a tear out of that damn face. I got that.
He indicates he wants the tape to prove that his anger at his wife is justified. What prompts his tirade? Susan asks him if he'd like some lunch.
Just come over here with this stupid and stir it up. No, you didn't leave. You didn't just come ask me about lunch.
He even makes his 13-year-old son join him in blaming her.
You enjoy getting your ass over, that's obvious. Yes, you do. Yeah, you do it anyway.
And if you're wondering what kind of woman would endure something like this if you're certain she's nothing like you, well, take a look at Susan on tape 3 years ago and look at the woman she really is today.
What do you see when you look at her? A woman desperately trying to save whatever she can salvage of her family. Desperately trying to please her husband and do whatever it is that he wants her to do.
According to a Department of Justice survey, 1 in 4 American women experience domestic violence. For Susan, the story begins when she's 18 years old, the daughter of a black father, a white mother, who falls in love with a 26-year-old guitarist in a popular local band. He is talented, charismatic. His name is Ulmer.
I would go to see him play on the weekends, and we'd talk on the phone, and we just sort of grew to know each other.
Did you say to yourself, I'm happy?
Absolutely.
They got married. He worked as a musician, she with a health insurance company, and they had their 3 children. We're covering their faces at her request.
Everyone looks at you, and I know the first thing they would think is, so beautiful, so intelligent. You must have been able to take care of yourself in any situation.
I was shy, I was very green. You know, my world was absolutely inside of the walls of our home.
She says at first her husband was just very demanding and controlling, not so different from her own father, whom she described as overbearing. But she says the more she tried to comply with her husband's demands, the more obsessive his control.
Did you have friends over for dinner?
Never. He never wanted friends over. He never wanted men in his house in particular.
And your father and stepfather didn't know about this?
My husband had cut me off from my father and family for many years.
How you gonna say something stupid like that?
And you can hear on the videotape how his badgering, his criticism wore her down by twisting her words.
When I was watching my son do something, he said, "Don't look at him like you're interested in what he's doing." And I said, "I think I am interested in what my children do."
I think I'm interested in my children.
And he turned that into, "I think I'm interested in what my children do."
So you can think you care about your children, whatever you think you care about. You don't.
And then he turned it into, "I think I love my children." All in the same conversation. That phrase turned into something totally different.
Stupid ass up.
In that 51-minute tape, Ulmer called Susan stupid 36 times.
It's just you standing there talking stupid like that pisses me off. Because you should be on these apologizing to stupid ass up.
The rants.
Yes, the mental and verbal abuse, just hours. I mean, he would call it a family meeting. And these family meetings were all about what mommy did wrong today. He totally had my children completely on his side, completely brainwashed. Not only could I not believe his behavior, but I couldn't believe my own children's behavior.
She says the verbal abuse had gone on for years before the words became fists. She says the first time he hit her, it was because she forgot something he wanted at a nearby grocery store. Her oldest child, her daughter, was 19.
He beat me down to the floor. I was crawling on the floor trying to get away. I remember my daughter turning on the vacuum cleaner so that my younger children couldn't hear it.
You know more what's going on at work than in your own house.
At the time of the tape, she was working, he was not. He was jealous of men on the outside.
And it's got to do with somebody at work.
It does not. I don't have anyone.
Have a line.
I can't tell you how many baseball coaches I was accused of.
The child is
swimming
videoing
teachers,
this as well.
Karate teacher, other parents. And
Video this line and tell.
But her greatest agony was the role of her children.
When you think your son was on the other side of that lens.
not only that, my younger son was right there also.
He was in the room.
Their youngest son, 8 years old.
Sit your stupid ass.
June 22, 2003, terrifying images of physical abuse, the kind the experts say takes place every 15 seconds someplace in this country. The difference is, this is caught on video.
You don't know what to do. Look at your stupid ass. Look at the
Behind the camera, a 13-year-old boy watching his mother slapped, slugged, and throttled by his father.
You keep playing, and then you're going to knock your head across that wall.
At one point, for nearly 3 minutes, the son seems unable to record what the father is doing. He keeps the lens facing away toward his own feet.
You follow what I say to the T.
The terrified mother, Susan, covers her face while the father, Ulmer, strangles her, throws her to the floor.
You're not stupid ass nerve about your stupid ass self. You don't learn that beat your nerve all the time. You not learn.
When you look back, are you amazed you didn't crack in some other way?
Absolutely. The only thing that kept me from cracking was the thought of my children.
Why didn't you leave?
A lot of it is preservation of family. I didn't want to see my family destroyed. And in my eyes, because of what he was telling me, I was the problem. So all I had to do was fix me.
On average, it will take 7 tries for a woman to leave her abuser. The psychological chains as strong as any metal.
He had literally, physically and mentally beat me down to nothing. I thought I was not as good as a piece of dirt on his shoe. And that's a place that is hard to come out of.
I remember saying to her, it's got to stop. It ends here.
I looked at her and I said, today's the day. Once I said to Lynn, that was it, she said, okay, I'm calling. and went and did it immediately.
With the help of police over the next few hours, she ran a heart-pounding race against the clock. Since her husband patrolled every minute of her day, she had to get to the children before he did, and before he made an irrational move. Officer Kathy Onions.
We decided to have Susan call the residents and speak to her husband to reassure him that she picked up the phone as she was instructed to. We wanted to document what his response was to this conversation and, have it on tape.
Hello, honey.
Where are you?
I'm afraid to come home. I'm afraid to come home.
You stupid ass up. What you mean you're afraid to come home? You better bring my son home. If you don't bring my son home, I'm gonna kill you, man.
I don't want you to hurt me. I'm afraid to come home.
In the end, Ulner is found guilty on all counts. The judge, who will never forget that searing tape, hands down a sentence of 36 years.
The videotape is it's terrible. And as you can see, it still gets to me.
According to the prosecutor, the sentence would be the longest in New York history for a domestic violence case in which the victim managed to stay alive.
People say you get murder convictions that don't have that kind of sentence.
What the judge said in sentencing was, you have destroyed this family as much, if not more, than if you had committed a murder.
It was an unusual case and it required some unusual punishment.
Now that's a glimpse into a family that you rarely ever get. It's always his word against her word, and the fact of the matter is, the kids came in and testified that none of this was happening, even though there was video evidence that it was. And the defendant was okay with the video being shown because it was going to show he was justified in what he did. Now, I would have hated to have been his attorney, but that's exactly what he did in there. He wanted the video shown because he knew that that would justify exactly what he had been doing. So I want you to understand, this is not unique. This is going on in homes. Kids are hearing it. And this is very detrimental to everyone. I mean, you have to wonder, what type of husbands are these young boys going to be? What type of man is that 19-year-old girl going to marry? And look at how quickly you'll have children justifying the actions of an abuser. So, to me, that video makes me shake because of how bad it is. But you have to understand, there is a certain amount of badgering that's going on in that home where there's domestic violence and the kids are hearing it. The very last thing that I want to say is these kids were not being abused, or were they? So, think about what they were witnessing.
If I can be of further assistance, anyone, I'll put my contact information on the slide there. If you need more of these DLAGs, electronic version of them, or if I can answer any questions, please feel free to contact me. I appreciate all the work that all of you do, and thank you for having me here today.
Now, before you guys leave, we're going to talk about billing. So, and I think that's kind of important to some of you guys. So, thank you so much.